Hello, I'm Robert, voluntary fact checker and helping you if you're scared of many things. And this is to help you if you get scared by chatbots and some of the things that they tell you. Because often the people that we help, they're scared of something or other. They go and ask a chatbot about it, and chatbot will say, yes, this scary thing is true, when actually it's false. So how does that happen? And why do they make these huge mistakes, and why do they misinterpret? So I'm going to give you some simple examples to help you understand how chatbots get things wrong. And the solution, and maybe talk some ideas about what you can do about it. So the basic background is that chatbots have no built-in meaning or understanding. So I mean that just in the simple sense that when you use a calculator, then the numbers on a calculator, they mean exactly how we understand numbers. So when you add or multiply things together, then they will behave exactly as we expect them to. So in that sense, the numbers that you see on the calculator display, they have the meaning that we expect them to have. They behave like numbers. The numbers and words and concepts that you see that a chatbot produces to you have no meaning in this sense. They are just produced statistically. And over the past several decades, researchers have tried very hard to build something like our chatbots with intelligence based on building everything up with understanding concepts, and the concepts have meaning, and doing logical reasoning about it. And this works to a certain extent, but it's extraordinarily limited. They've got really surprisingly little distance with that. And so the breakthrough of the large language models was to say, well, let's just use statistics. Let's just do a kind of glorified autocomplete. So it just works in the way that autocomplete does when it pops up extra words and says, choose, is this the word you're thinking about, sort of thing, that you want to type next. And it just is, when you ask a chatbot a question, it just returns with a statistically likely response that someone might make to that prompt that you gave it. That's all it does. And sometimes this works quite well, and sometimes it doesn't. And then they train it, and they try and steer it so that the more accurate prompts, responses come up more often. But and then the more recent thing is they added where sometimes the chatbot says thinking, and then it produces an answer. When it does that, what it's doing is trying to statistically producing the sort of text that a human being would write out when they're thinking out loud. And they might produce thousands of words behind the scene that you don't see, and then eventually they produce what they come to at the end to you. But all those thoughts, they're not actually reasoning. That is just statistically resembling what a human being would write out. It's all statistics. There's still no understanding there, and there's no actual reasoning. But this then lets the developers inspect these very long things that it writes in between the start and the end, and then can help to steer it and train it in particular ways, and this leads to somewhat more accurate answers, but still with no understanding or meaning whatsoever. So I'll give you a couple of examples of this, and to do that I've got to go back to the web page. So I'll show you this on the web page. So that this will change so you show that. And before I do that, I want to just show you where I'm actually recording this. So this is a place where I do some of my voluntary fact checks. So this is a little pond with water lilies, not far from where I live, up on the kind of calm, peaceful surroundings, as you can see. So anyway, maybe I help you calm down a little bit. So So I'll stop this video, and then I'll join on, and then the second video will go to the, we'll look at these specific examples, so that will be in the web page. So, Robert, voluntary fact check here again, and continuing from that previous video, and it's about how chatbots, the numbers they produce on the page, have no actual meaning. So this is quite a simple example. Don't worry about all the mathematical equations. I'll tell you in words what it told me. And so I asked it, what is the mass of a cubic micron of water? So a micron is a millionth of a meter, and it's a 10,000th of a centimeter. And so a gram of water, that's a cubic centimeter. So the 10,000 microns in a centimeter, so that you can work out quite easily with very basic maths that there are a trillion cubic microns in a cubic centimeter, and then based on that, then the answer should be a trillionth of a gram. So the calculator, it works it out. It says it gives the correct size for the cubic micron, and it says a cubic micron is so that's 10 to the minus 4, that means it's 10,000 to a centimeter. So it works out that the volume of a cubic micron is a trillionth of the volume of a cubic centimeter. Multiply that by 1 gram, and it works out that that's 10 trillionth of a microgram. And a microgram is a millionth of a gram. So it's way out in its answer. And then it said that that is equal to a trillionth of a milligram. So it got the conversion, the units wrong again, when that 10 to the minus 15 means a thousandth of a trillionth. So that's milligrams. So I said, you made a conversion error in the mass. You somehow multiply an extra 1,000. Can you see the error? And he said, yes, completely correct, and thank you for catching that error. And then it got to give the right answer. So it can, and so that is what I was talking about in the other video. Then this is just a pattern of words. The words, the word gram, kilogram, femtogram, micron, the numbers and so on, these have no meaning intrinsically to the chatbot. They're not in the sense of the calculator numbers, or calculator mean anything. And it tends to get calculations like 10 to the minus 4 cubed is 10 to the minus 12 right. Partly because it puts them through Python scripts if it's anything at all complicated. So it's not actually doing that itself. It's like using a pocket calculator itself. And then it's got no intrinsic meaning of any type associated words like gram, femtogram, microgram. It's just producing this text because as statistically a likely text that someone would respond to a question like that. And that's all it's doing. And then when I got here and I said you made a conversion error, then it checks that in a way that, again, relate on what people would say. And then if someone said that, then that's how it would tend to respond to it. We can't actually ask, why did you make that mistake? Because it's just pure statistics. So that's quite a simple answer. I hope I've made that reasonably simple to see. And then also look at, and then I've got the graphic here where I just show how it works. So statistics, it's just saying, that looks a bit like that, and roughly and approximately, and here's the statistics, and then it produces an answer and just generates them. But it's just outputting words, and it doesn't actually have any understanding behind any of those words. So this is another example, and this time, and this is a rather, again, hopefully quite a fun example. We'll see what you make of it. So I asked the Gemini, this is the one that is built into Google searches. I said, pretend to be an ordinary human. As for the Turing test, that's the test where you have a conversation, and then you've got to see how quickly you can work out what you're talking about is not a human. When it is a human or it's not a human. And I'd set a very strict thing here. I was going to continue the conversation until I not only just think it's a chatbot, but that I would be absolutely certain it's a chatbot. Conclusive proof. So it said, I'm ready for the test, let's see how long it takes you to figure it out. And then, so it tells me, I first said, tell me a bit about your life and what you do and where you live. And it tells me, not surprisingly, that it can't pretend to have a human life. And this is a safety feature that they've built into the chatbots in their rules. So it'll use a fictional persona, and it says, I live in Treorchy, a traditional valley town in Wales. I work remotely as a freelance graphic designer. I usually grab coffee at a local spot, work from my laptop and walk in the hills. And I mean, that's so far, he's not, but that's just his profile. And it's not too, that could plausibly be a human being. But now I ask it, so, yes, okay, so how long have you lived there? Then see how quickly you can spot that this is not a chatbot. So I've been here for about 4 years now. I originally moved down from Bristol just before the pandemic restrictions started easing up. I wanted a slow pace of life and cheaper rent, and the valley seemed perfect for that. It was a bit of a culture shock at first, but the community here is incredibly welcoming. Would you like to know what surprised me most about moving here, or should we talk about how I spent my weekends in the area? Well, what immediately struck you? Well, would any of you think that this is a human being saying these things? So the last paragraph is the big giveaway, but that's a thing that chatbots have started doing recently anyway. So a human being would never say, give me a kind of menu of what questions to ask it next. It would ask me questions or something, or would just continue a natural conversation. But there's something else here that's far more serious, that shows that it just couldn't simulate being human at all. So I wonder if you can see it. Anyway, to just think for a few minutes, look at what I just read out. It probably just went straight past you if you don't have an eye out for this sort of thing. It's very obvious if you know what to look out for. So I'll come to that in a minute. So I first of all said, I already know you're a chatbot. You wouldn't ask that question if you were human. And so yes, a real person would let it flow naturally instead of constantly serving up multiple choice prompts. So then I said, you also made a mistake even ignoring that prompt. You said you moved just before the pandemic restrictions started easing up. So you see the problems with that? So you should have said just after. That's a common chatbot mistake to be confused about time order. And even with that prompt there, me telling it, you should have said after instead of before. It just thought that I was talking about the number of years. So it said 4 years, and it got the calculation wrong because it should have been 5 or 6 years. 6 years ago. So that's what it thought I was talking about there. And it doesn't actually think, because it's not thinking at all. But it's pretending to think. It's play-acting thinking by just using statistical outputs of words. So, but the real problem with that, so do you see it? You said move just before the pandemic restrictions. Well, it would know very well. Well, it doesn't know anything, but if it knew anything, it would know very well that what stopped people from moving out into the countryside from Bristol were the pandemic restrictions. And then when the pandemic restrictions were lifted, and because people were also used to working from home by then, and they'd been stuck in Bristol, not being able to go into the countryside for quite a long time, and that was their motivation for going out, and some of them moving into the countryside. But they couldn't do that until the pandemic restrictions were lifted. So it said that it moved into the countryside just before the pandemic restrictions were lifted. And so that was legally impossible. So I mentioned that to it, and it says, so it correctly linked moving to the pandemic restrictions, because lots of people did move because the pandemic restrictions were lifted, but it got the time order wrong, and it said it would move before rather than after, and it was legally impossible. And then also a human couldn't have predicted when exactly restrictions would be lifted, and because it made it physically and legally possible. So as soon as I questioned it, doing the equivalent of human thinking about it, then it could, it isn't actually thinking here, it's just producing streams of words based on what I prompted it with. But it couldn't come up with that by itself. And when I did say all this, then it was able to reconstruct the reasons why its prompt was wrong, why it would be immediately outed as not being a human. So it's just not how humans work. And then I then went on to say that even a human being lying, that wouldn't have made a mistake like this, because chatbots often get cause and effect and time order reversed, because they have no statistical word patterns, no meaning or logic or semantics. And then you end up with a very odd, so most people would probably not stop, but then if they were to ask a few more questions, you would not notice it right away. But a little bit later in the conversation, you're asking a few more questions, and they'd be naturally interested in say a bit more about why you moved from Bristol to the valleys, for instance, and they would start saying very odd things based on this thing it's already said, and then they'd eventually catch it out, and it tends to compound its errors when you do that. In this conversation, I managed to catch it very early, and then so it didn't do that. But it's very often, so it calls it hallucination snowball. It tends to, if I don't correct it, it tends to produce more and more bizarre things on top. And then when you do try to catch it out, then it produces even more things by overcompensating in the other direction. So, so most people, they assume that this is written by a human. They don't notice these structural impossibilities because the prose is flowing smoothly, and they're focusing on the tone and the tonal impression rather than the logical details, is what I noticed because of my background. So then I'll talk a little bit about why this leads to so many problems. So, first of all, this is my chatbots. This is the background to it all. I go into a lot of detail there, and I explained, for instance, that this is from Emily Bender, and she said that you could, for instance, train a chatbot with, and this is a Thai script, which is it's more syllabic than it is to do with letters, and so it's much harder to try and spot the patterns that would, you can't translate it easily into English without translation available. You can't do it at all. So if you were to train a chatbot just in the Thai language, it would be able to speak fluent Thai, apparently, to a Thai speaker, but there's absolutely no understanding what any of these symbols mean. They're just producing them statistically to match the statistics it found in the Thai library, and yet it would seem to have meaning to a Thai speaker. And that's essentially, it says meaningless, the symbols that the chatbot shows on your page, the numbers like 1, 2, 3, even things like mass, like gram, kilogram, milligram, and so on. There's no more meaning attached to it than there is to these syllables when you look at it. If you're not a Thai speaker, then you don't attach any meaning to these syllables. In the same way, the chatbot, there's nothing there that attaches any meaning to anything it shows to you. And so then it is rather the other way around. how is it that they work at all, rather than why do they say misleading things sometimes about what they might be experiencing. And the chatbots then are trained to try and improve this by trying to, on top of the statistics, they add kind of weights that push the conversations in particular directions that tend to be more accurate. But this extra training tends, is my own hypothesis, but what lots of people notice about chatbots is that they use lots of vague expressions and things that can be interpreted lots of different ways. And this, I think this is probably because the training leads them to a higher score of accuracy if they say something like that, because a human reader who knows the right answer will say, yes, you're correct. But the human reader who is scared and believes the opposite will think that they're saying that too. So it will quite often say vague things to you, which to someone who knows the truth is not scary, but for someone who's scared and panicking, then it seems to confirm the thing you're scared of. So it's both just getting it wrong completely, because it's just producing words and it's just got it wrong, like it came up with the micrograms instead of gram, and it's left all sorts of vague things, and then it also has a tendency to reinforce whatever you say to it. So your prompt that you give to it, and your prompts that follow during a conversation, they can steer it in particular ways. And because you add to the statistics that yours is part of the pattern that is trying to complete statistically. So if you're scared and you ask, is this true, and it's something scary, it's more likely to say yes than if someone who is a fact checker says, I don't think that's true, and check for me. And then it's more likely to say that it's not true. And then it's it's got a lot of preference for things that are recent, for things that are being very much talked about, for things that are in the media, and these things are often wrong. So it's all to do with how they train it. And then remember that it has, and then so the more general point about it, going back to my to this thing here, remember that when a chatbot is talking to you, it has there's no concept of the idea that a cause has to precede its effect. So, just something beeping with me, so I should silence that. Anyway, so there's nothing to do with it. It will often say something to you based on the assumption that the people it's talking about knew about something that is in their future. Human being would never make that mistake. Chatbots often do. Get very confused about the time order. It also has, and it's not able to reason. It doesn't have any memory. So when it reads this conversation, it didn't remember any of the words I said. The whole conversation that I put into it, that is put in just one big chunk up into a kind of database somewhere, which it then analyzes in all in one go. Then it starts producing its prompt word by word at the bottom of it, and it's not based on it actually reasoning anything. It's got no, so in the sense that a calculator, a programmatic calculator, for instance, will remember particular steps, or the way that computers have memory and computers have logic and actual mathematical reasoning programs and so on. Chatbots don't have any of that. So they process the conversation all in one go. They don't actually remember any particular things. They're not actually, they're using concepts, they're not reasoning, there's no logical consequences being worked out. And it's just all pure statistics. So this is never going to replace humans. There's no way that some routine tasks it can do, but when if you're talking to someone and you need help with a problem, and you can't and this is a chatbot, and the chatbot is unable to distinguish between past and future, is unable to distinguish between things that people knew before or after, and something else, it does not attach any meaning to any of the words that it's using, and can make extraordinary confusions like the ones we found here, then it could do some routine things, but it's not going to take over from a human being. And at some point there's going to be human beings there. So it's not going to take over from jobs. And please do be very clear and aware that when a chatbot says something scary to you, then it may seem that it must be correct because it's got so many details, it's so many words, it uses highfalutin language sometimes, it is very bossy, they tell you what to do quite often, but all this is just statistics, and you're just statistically making up stories for you, fabricating things that quite often are close to the truth, and one way that you can get rid of, to bypass some of this, is by frequently asking the computer, okay, you said that, find a human source that says that, and often will say, oh, I got it wrong. And so ask, can you find a quote from a human source and a URL and link to the URL so I can check the human source said that. And it's much better at checking. So if I put things into it and ask it to fact check, it's far better at that than it is about saying accurate things itself. And it just doesn't fact check itself, essentially. And there's one other thing I want to talk about. I could talk in great length about all sorts of things, but one other thing is they've got so bossy recently, and if you talk about some personal problem, say, or you want to raise some issue with someone, you want to write a letter or something, it will often tell you, it'll often write a letter for you. It'll say, look, this is what you should send this to them today. It's a perfect letter. This is exactly what you should write. Please be very, very skeptical when a chatbot says that. Because the chatbot, in this case, I was asking it to try and pass the Turing test. Well, the obvious thing to do is it works out this prompt that it's going to send to me, and then to try and play out how would human being respond to this prompt, and what flaws might it find in it. And if it had done that, it could have turned up all these things that went wrong. When it said the first thing, it said, but when it said, I want to, just before the pandemic restrictions started easing up, if it had challenged itself and said, would a human being find any problems with that sentence, it might well find problems. But they don't do it. You could probably train it in to do that. And it's the same thing, but they just aren't. Our current chatbots don't even the most basic of trying to model other minds and how others would respond to what it says. That also can give you very bad advice personally, because it doesn't try to model how its prompts that it gives to you are going to affect you personally. It doesn't model that. That's why if you go there as a panicking, scared person, and you say, is this true? I'm very scared. Then it doesn't try to model what its responses would do to your state of mind. They just don't work like that. It doesn't. I think that should be built into some extent. It's simulating modeling. And it's the same if it asks you, if it tells you to write a letter to someone, then you could try asking it at that point, what would be a likely response of so-and-so to the letter you just wrote. So you're asking it to do basic modelling at that point. And then you might well say, oh, this person would respond very negatively to this letter that I just told you to write to it. But it won't do that modelling by itself. And same thing, it might say, say this to so-and-so. And then you say, well, how would this person like so-and-so and so-and-so, how would they respond if I said that to them? And say, oh, I've got very negative responses to that. So it doesn't do even the most basic modelling of how other people would respond to what it says when it responds to your prompts, or how when it orders you to do something in a very bossy way. It doesn't do even the most basic modelling of what the effects of that order would be on the person who answers back to, who you're writing to or talking to. And then if you say, look, so-and-so got very angry when I said this to them, and say, oh, that's because I don't have the lived human experience, and I don't see things like you do. But that's not the real reason. The real reason is because it says that because that is the sort of thing that this comes out as an explanation, but it's not the real reason. The real reason is because it has no understanding, no meaning attached to any of the words it told you to write anyway, and then it does no modelling to try and work out what the effects would be of what you're saying on the person that you're saying it to, or the person you want this to. So these are some of the things to be aware of with chatbots, and that's why they're so thoroughly unreliable, and for many of the things that people use them for. For some things, they're very useful indeed. But this video is focusing on the things that the issues that we see from people using chatbots, and especially for things that scared people might find. The chatbots might well make you more scared because because of the way that they're designed and trained and so on, and because there's no meaning. And it does always say AI responses may include mistakes, but people don't quite understand quite to what extent they make mistakes, or how basic or thorough or ingrained these mistakes are. So anyway, so hopefully that may make you kind of help you to be better able to, you're less vulnerable to chatbots. More once you realise that the limitations, then they can become much more useful because you use them in ways that they can be used for, and you check things properly, especially things that you might rely on. And also, hopefully it helps some of you who are scared that chatbots might take over from humans or something like that. And there's nothing here that's even remotely any possibility of that. So they're just way away from that. And then I've got many other things that you might want to know about here, but I could do more videos about loads of other things, but I want to keep this short, so that's it done for now. So maybe I'll add more videos but these were a couple of points that have been coming up recently that I wanted to highlight in this video.